And today we have the opportunity to speak with Frank Ledwidge, senior lecturer at the Royal Air Force College and a former military intelligence officer. Hello and welcome.
Good evening, Paul.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed that Russia had received Iranian ballistic missiles and announced new sanctions against Iran. We warned them privately that such a move would mean a dramatic escalation, Blinken said. And these developments increased cooperation between Russia and Iran, threaten European security and demonstrate destabilizing Iran's influence that extends the Middle East. And I have a few questions about the transfer of these missiles. Do you think that the response from the White House with sanctions is sufficient?
Well, I think that they are not particularly rich in options with respect to this, but the sanctions mustn't be underestimated. Over the last decade or so, those sanctions have increased in scale and they do real damage to the Iranian economy. And a surprising restriction on what the Iranians can do. As you know, one of the sanctions, for example, was against Iran Air. And I think what that will do is have a rather major knock-on effect of the ability of Iran Air and the Iranians more widely, Iranian government, to operate on an international scale, particularly in the civil aviation world. The US, of course, is by far the most important actor in the civil aviation world. And these sanctions, I think, will if not put a stop to Iran Air, will certainly seriously restrict its ability to travel worldwide, let's say. Plus, needless to say, restrict its capability in transporting drones or other material, not just to Russia, but more widely in the world, particularly in the Middle East.
And Iran has transferred, if I'm not mistaken, Fateh 360 missiles to Russia, which will lead to even more deaths of Ukrainians as they will try to destroy our energy system. These missiles have a range of about 120 kilometers. And according to US, dozens of Russian military personnel have already been trained in Iran to use these missile systems. How will they change the situation in Ukraine, maybe on battlefield and with energy infrastructure?
I don't think they're going to have much effect directly on strikes on the energy system, since, as you say, they're fairly short range. The 120-kilometer range you speak of is a maximum range, and more likely these will be used to the rear of the zero line, to the rear of the battlefield. Everybody in Ukraine knows only too well, the Russians have an inventory of ballistic missiles, some of them with far longer range than these. What this will allow the Russians to do is have a rather greater set of options on the battlefield. And I think that's where these will be used, in the sort of rear, as we say, not necessarily the deep rear, but the rear of the battlefield. So the targets will be the same sort of thing, I think, that we use, if I can describe it like that, ATACMS and such, and to a lesser extent, HIMARS, precision targeting of specific, mostly probably military capabilities. I think that's as far as it will go. What it does is, as I said, mainly it gives the Russians just that bit greater capacity. It doesn't really offer them more capability. They can do this kind of thing already, but their capacity to do so in numbers, in bulk, is, I think, running out. So this will backfill their arsenal, if I could put it like that.
Okay, thank you. And will this act of transfer announced by Antony Blinken, as exposed by Antony Blinken, lead to the final decision of the United States, United Kingdom and other partners to allow Ukraine to hit the enemy rear, the Russian territory, with Western missiles? And if so, should we expect this decision to be announced maybe on the summit of Crimea platform today or in a couple of days later?
I don't know. I don't have any insight to the decision-making within the United States senior echelons. I would say a couple of things, though. It's my impression that they're trying to kick this problem beyond the election. They are rightly or wrongly concerned about escalation and what impact that might have on things like cyber attacks on the US, similar sorts of problems. There's another problem too, though, and I don't think this is adequately realized. Certainly for the UK and the Storm Shadows cruise missiles, I think there's a problem not only from the Americans, but frankly, from the unfortunate situation that the UK has a very limited stock of these missiles. I'm sure the same is true of the French Scalps, which are essentially the same thing, because they have not increased the rate of construction of these things. There is no way that anyone could describe the shift in production of such assets into a wartime rate. That hasn't happened. So the UK is left with the problem that it has a limited number of these things. It will have to reserve some of them for themselves in the event that we come into direct conflict with Russia. So there is that problem as well. I don't think that problem impacts so much on the US. They have a fairly large stock of ATACMS, HIMARS, and other HIMARS systems already there. But it is a problem, I think, for the British and the French. And it's never going to be acknowledged that in public because it's the sort of thing that's first embarrassing and secondly rather sensitive.
Okay. That is fairly logical. We can see a lot of ATACMS missiles in the US, but still not enough sufficiency in the production of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. Maybe the Germans are still considering Taurus missiles because of that too.